The Own Your Intuitive podcast is for the creatives, spiritual entrepreneurs, and light workers in the world. The shining ones who have been told to dim their light and stop believing in magic. I say screw that. The time to rise is now. To bring your gifts out into the world in a big way, creating a business that feeds your soul and your bank account. You are a magical being with the potential to change the world, one human at a time. The time for you to own your intuitive is now. Hey everybody, I am so excited. I have a guest today here on the show that I want to be when I grow up because she is sassy, she is spicy, she is fun, and she is teaching the world how to age in a new way. We're bringing the rock and roll back to the 60s in a way we've never heard before. So, Joan Lubar, I'm so excited to have you on the show today as a guest.
Well, thank you. I am equally excited. I've been reading your podcast and your Facebook page and going, oh, I like this person. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Me too. Like I went to everybody because I do a little digging. I don't do a lot of digging because I wanna actually know people just through that space of shared energy. But I do look into a little bit of like their background and who they are. And Joan, your energy, just like it exudes out of everything, like your website, your Facebook. I was just like, this is going to be so much fun today.
Oh, well, I hope so. I mean, that life should be fun. You know, what is life should be enjoyed, not endured. You know?
Can you just tell everybody just so that they understand, can you just tell everybody the name of your book right now so that we get a true sense of you?
Well, the name of my book is Rock and Roll at Any Age. And it's a rebellious look at life, health, and spiritual wisdom from the Sassy Sage.
And so can I just ask how you came up with the name, the Sassy Sage?
Oh, actually, it's kind of funny because a friend of mine had another title that she had been using called, it was like, oh, I don't even remember, but it was longer. And I called her up and I said, are you renewing this? Because I knew it was coming up for renewal. And she said, yeah, I think we're going to use that. And so it was like, well, I want to brainstorm what I can use, because part of what I loved about her little sentence or phrase was sassy sage. So we talked about it and, hey, I'm a sassy person. Let's just use a short version of that, the sassy sage. And she said, great, that doesn't, go into my website or my website name. And so that's what I did. And everybody that knows me said, oh, that's perfect. And it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll take it.
I loved it. As soon as I saw that, I was like, we are soul sisters for life for that. And so giving a little overview of how you actually help people. Are you working with people in like above 60? Do you work with everybody? Like, what is it that you do right now, Joan?
Well, I really kind of work with everybody in that I think health begins as young as you can start. So I know what to do for families. I had a son who was ADHD, and and we're talking 50 years ago. So it was really hard to find any information on what to do naturally, and I really didn't want to put him on medication. Unfortunately, I had to do that for a few years, and then as soon as my husband and I got divorced, I took him off. But so I really had some interest. I was trying to learn things and there just wasn't much around. So I really love working with families because now, years later, after I really started studying nutrition and wellness and what it takes to really stay healthy and keep your family healthy, I realized there were so many things I could have done to help him and then later to help myself. So that's kind of how I got into this whole thing.
And so you support families and women and just everybody coming back to vitality and health and like really
Yeah.
trying like finding themselves in that experience.
Yes. And as I've aged and people have said to me, gosh, what is it that you do that's keeping you looking? I mean, I'm 77, so keeping me so young and healthy and able to do so many things. And I started to look into what I was doing, and I realized there was a pattern and there was a plan that I personally was following. And that's partly why I wrote the book. And part of the reason I wrote the book is that I really felt that I needed to help people age and feel healthy, because how many people do you know, oh, that I'm feeling badly because I'm getting old? And I was like, I don't think so. And I didn't, and I felt like as a society don't honor our elders, and they have so much to offer, but so many of them are not well that they really need help to feel great so they can be out in the community and make a difference. And I mean, look at all the grandmothers that are taking care of their grandkids, and they need help, but they also need be able to share that wisdom that they've gained. So
That's
that's kind of but mostly I'm dealing with women.
I love that. And I have to say, because we didn't talk about your age before jumping onto the podcast. And so if you're listening and you don't see the live video on YouTube, I would never have guessed, Joan, that you were 77. Like by any stretch of the imagination, like you glow. You have like this beautiful energy. You look youthful. Like I was thinking maybe early 60s.
Well, thanks. I'll take that. That would be good.
Right? Sidebar 7 is my lucky number, so that made me happy too. But that's just a
Oh,
little.
okay.
So
Well, actually, I have to just share something funny. This year, my birthday is July 7th. So I became 77 on 7/7. And that was just kind of very exciting.
I think that's exciting. That would be like the happiest day ever. And then you actually have 7/7 as your. I do a whole email in one of my sequences that talks about why 7 is my lucky number. I was also born in 77. There's 7 chakras. Well, there's more than that, but there's 7 that I work with and all of that. So I totally love that you shared that. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's funny because I waited years for 7777.
You
Yeah,
made it with vitality.
you are a soul sister.
Yes. Yes. So this is beautiful because you just talked about imparting wisdom and our elders being here to do so and going out into the community. And I mean, before we jumped on, you were talking about how you want to like travel and speak on stages and get this message out. That truly is, getting out there. But before we even dive into that, I would love to take it back, Joan, sorry, not June, Joan, to the beginnings of Joan. Like, what was your origin story? Where did you start as a young kid?
Actually, I started in Washington, D.C. I now live in Portland, Oregon, kind of the furthest from Washington, D.C., which might be a good thing today. But I grew up in D.C., and actually my mom was born in Washington, D.C. We're talking in the city, and my dad grew up in Washington, D.C. So that world was our local news, not just national news. So that was always very interesting to me. And then as a kid, I had some, excuse me, I had some health problems. Of course, we knew nothing. And it changed a lot of things for me and my own self-image. So over the years, I made some poor decisions based on not feeling really good about myself. And then I finally started to get it together and started doing some reading and got into spirituality. I had gotten married, and like I said, my son was ADHD, so I was trying really hard to find the right things for him, and it was almost impossible. So it was just, I think everything that's happened to me in my life has really built to who I am today. But to give you more details, when I was 40, I had some surgery, and I just could not get my energy back, and I was just not feeling right. So I finally went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh, well, you're 40. Of course, you're going to be more tired. You're going to gain weight." And I'm going like, "Oh, I don't think this is going to happen." So I realized that I had to take responsibility for my own health. And literally that was among the many things that started to keep me, to teach me how to be healthy, how to have a better attitude. And I started, well, actually before that, I have to say I'd been married twice by then. And both husbands were kind of the same, which was domineering and just not really good for me. But I didn't have enough confidence in myself. So when I came back, actually, I was living in Brazil for a couple of years. And that's where I separated from my second husband, and came back to the States. And it was like, I really need to fix this. I don't know what's going on. And that was 1980. And then in 1983 was when I had the surgery. And once I started to take care of myself, I met someone who talked to me about nutrition and gave me some ideas and said, "Hey, if it doesn't work for you, you get your money back." And so it was like, "Oh, I can do that." Well, I haven't given her my money back or gotten my money back since, and that's 35, 38 years now. So that started me in 1983. Then in 85, I was introduced to a couple who became my spiritual teachers, and I've worked with them. He has since passed on, but I've been working with her for over 35 years. So, or I guess it's 34 to be accurate. But anyway, so that was the next step. And the third step was I'd always loved to dance. And I had moved into a home that my next door neighbor kept saying, "Oh, come, you love to dance. Why don't you come country western dancing with me?" Well, I got to tell you, country western music was the lowest. Maybe heavy metal was below that. But it was like, no. And finally, she convinced me to try it. And I went with her, and I just fell in love. It was like rock and roll music to me. And I was able to dance again and be able to go to places that I didn't have to have a guy with me, because everybody just was there to dance. So I started dancing, and that became my movement. So my base triangle for health is your attitude, which was the combination of spirituality and really working on myself. Everything had to do with self-growth, self-understanding. And that was one side of the triangle. Another side was movement. And then the base was what you ate and your supplements that you took, and really building from the cellular level. And that became my mantra, I guess you could say. And that's stuck with me for over 30 years. And as a result, people ask me what I do. And so I do one-on-one consultations. I do group presentations. I've done speaking on everything from whether it's family health or children's health to women's health, general, how to stay healthy. And it's more than just the food that you put in. It's what you have in your home. Most people have so many toxic chemicals in their home, and there are things that they're using that they advertise, and people buy what they advertise, and they're killing themselves. So that's another part of it. And I really feel I'm on a mission to help people get educated as to what they can do to stay healthy and live healthier and happier. So I even do things like Master Your Mind as other presentations. So it's kind of runs the gamut of what you need to build optimal health, optimal wellness, and a great attitude.
Well, and I mean, now through that story alone, you've been through so much. Like you have, really, what's the word I wanted to say, championed a few different movements, right? Because you were taking your child off of ADHD medication before anyone would do that. Like that was like, that was the time of the pill popping. Like that's when, pharmaceuticals was at its pinnacle.
Oh, I don't know that it was at its pinnacle. I think it's gotten higher since then. But yes, you're right. And oh, listen, I feel like I was a woman of many firsts. That was one thing. And getting divorced 50 years ago, you didn't get divorced. It was you stuck with it and figured it out. And it just was destroying my older son, who was the one who was ADHD, and it already had really worked its uncomfortable magic on me. So
can I ask something about that? Because I think this is a really powerful thing to talk about. Like because you married young then, or was it?
I married when I was almost 21.
Right. And how long did that marriage last?
12 years.
And you had your son during that time?
2 sons. Yes, I have 2 boys.
You have 2 boys. And I mean, to what point did you get to that you said this, I'm going to kind of break through what society says is okay, and I'm going to do what's right for myself and my children?
Probably a few years before I got divorced, because even though I had a college degree, and this is kind of interesting how naive I was, I guess. I don't know. I had a college degree in American thought and civilization. I lived in Washington, D.C. There were all kinds of think tanks that I really could have applied for a job, but I never thought about that. I was trying to figure out what can I do. And so a friend, they didn't know I wanted to get divorced, but they knew I wanted to go back to school and have something I could get a job with. And she introduced me to a neighbor of hers who was a teacher of accounting at University of Maryland. And I thought, oh, wow, I could become a CPA. That would be a profession I could make enough money to, just in case I had a problem with my ex with money. And I went back to school and became a CPA. And I started that a couple years before I got divorced because I knew I had to get out of this marriage. It was very toxic. He had a very sarcastic sense of humor and was not nice. And I thought, I was handling it sort of, but he was really destroying my older son because he couldn't accept the fact that at the time they called that hyperactivity, not ADHD. So he just couldn't accept that. That was making him look bad. I mean, it just wasn't going to work. And I could not keep my kids in that environment anymore. So that's kind of how we got started.
Right. And so then this is what I really want to know, random questions. Like, how did you end up in Brazil?
Second husband. I married somebody that I actually interviewed for a job with. And he had a different job in mind for me, actually. And I was so naive. I had just split up. I really did not, I hadn't dated much at all in my life. So, this was like somebody who was treating me really well. Well, he was very manipulative and I didn't realize it. Then anyway, we ended up getting married and my kids hated him. And the one thing on his list that he had for what he wanted in a woman and a wife was that they didn't have kids. So you can imagine that was kind of a major thing. And so if he had accepted the kids and really tried to be a real, not a father, but at least a
role model.
Yes, it would have. Yes, a good role model would have been nice. But anyway, it's too much like my ex-husband. So we got married and we talked about going international. He was with a large CPA firm. And we decided we would put in for international. Well, I'm thinking, maybe Belgium, maybe Germany, whatever. And I had lived in Germany as well with my first husband for 3 years when he was in the service. So, I'm thinking of something European, right? And they said, guess what? You're going to Brazil. I was like, Brazil? Oh my God. But it was a phenomenal experience, even though the marriage wasn't working. for my older son, it was amazing because Brazil, first of all, it's very family oriented and they let kids be kids. And one of the things I realized is that in the States, we talk about being permissive, but we're actually not. And you don't really let kids be kids. And the kids down there, they were wild. I mean, they were doing a little bit of everything. I think some of the kids in the building we lived in, and of course my son, were found outside under a tree lighting matches and burning stuff. I mean, it was like, and the parents, oh, okay, they're just being curious and, active and whatever. So in the long run, it was a great experience for my two kids and myself. However, he just didn't treat my kids very well. And finally, it was just choose between your kids and him, and there was no option. I mean, there was no way I would not choose my kids. So we all came back to the United States and left him in Brazil.
Well, what's fascinating is I lived in Brazil from the time I was 17 to 18. So I lived there in a year.
Oh, really? Where? Where'd you live?
I lived in Catanduva, which was, you look like you would actually know what Catanduva is. I was like, that'd be really cool. But it was about 4 hours out of Sao Paulo.
I lived in Sao Paulo.
Yeah. It's such a different way of life there. It is just so relaxed and it is so laid back and everything is just about barbecues and socializing and enjoying life.
A lot of joy.
A lot of joy. So I celebrate that you loved it as much as I did. So you come back. So you're now in your late 30s, I'd say.
Let's see. I was about, I guess, let's see, that was 1980. So yeah, I was 38. Didn't even realize I was that old. But anyway, yeah, I came back and again, I came back and I thought, all right, I need some help here. Why am I choosing these men that are just domineering and not good and they don't work for me? And that was part of the attitude I came back. But again, remember, I didn't have that great a feeling about myself, even though here I was, I had gotten divorced. I had gone back to school and become a CPA, passed my CPA exam. And still, I didn't realize that I had all of this power that I was using, but wasn't giving myself credit for. And in fact, when I came back from Brazil, I went to my mom's, and the story of coming back from Brazil was also unbelievably dramatic and crazy because the plane almost crashed. And we got stuck in Western Brazil for like, I guess it was over 24 hours. And the plane I was supposed to take back to Washington, D.C. was only once a week from Lima, Peru. So, I mean, it was like, as I'm going through all these things, I ended up having to fly all the way to California and then all the way back to Washington, D.C. And I still got there before the plane that they wanted me to take. So, and then landed in a snowstorm. So my parents couldn't pick me up. And I had the dog with me. I mean, it was like this wild story. And a guy, I took a cab from a place we got a bus in to one of the hotels, and I took a cab to my parents. And the guy was a Vietnam veteran and drove like he didn't care if he died in the middle of a snowstorm. So all these crazy things happening, I'm saying to myself, okay, there's really a serious message here. Like, you better get your act together. But then within 2 weeks, I had a car, a job, and a place to live. I mean, and it was like, how'd you do that, Joan? You really must have something going on that you could get your act together and be able to do all these things. So it was a profound, eye-opening awareness for me.
Because you also championed, because spirituality wasn't that That wasn't considered. Like right now, we could say intuition, we can talk about consciousness, we can talk about all of these things, metaphysical, like anything, and it's more mainstream than it's ever been. But when you began your self-development spiritual journey, that wasn't something everybody was doing.
Definitely not. And I think we talked a little bit about this before. I my first real awareness that we were more than just this body was in 8th grade. And in 8th grade, I had a science teacher who talked about matter and energy. And matter is, he said, could not be created, could not be destroyed. And energy could not be created and could not be destroyed. But they were interchangeable. And it was like, that's a really interesting thing to learn. And I walked out of the class and said to one of my friends, we've been here a long time. And that concept stayed with me. And years later, really, early, like in the late 60s. And I was also kind of a closet hippie because I was just a little older than all those kids that started the love triangles and whatever they did, that I always wanted to be a part of that, but I never was. I had 2 kids and, but anyway, so I took a yoga class and I read the book, Autobiography of a Yogi, and I found that so fascinating. And then in the yoga class, one of the ladies in the yoga class gave me a book about Edgar Cayce. And are you familiar with Edgar Cayce?
No, I'm not.
A fascinating man. I don't know when he died, but I think in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, I'm not sure. But he was a young man who lived in Kentucky, was very religious, and something happened physically to him. And one day, he said, all of a sudden, he went into this trance and started talking to his parents and telling them what to do to fix what was wrong with him. And from that moment on, the word got around and people started asking him, what do they do? And he became, like, they called him the sleeping prophet. There's a book called The Sleeping Prophet.
Just got shivers.
Huh?
I said I just got shivers.
Yeah, oh, totally. And he went from there, and he started getting metaphysical answers as well. And it disagreed with his Christian upbringing. So finally, he was given the message that he needed to go to Virginia Beach and start a foundation. And he called it Association for Research and Enlightenment. I think it's ARE. And it's still in Virginia Beach. And there was somebody who recorded every single thing he ever said. And it was just volumes of how to heal yourself and the things to do. And the story is fascinating. But so they gave me that book, and there was a little part in the book that explained, I guess, kind of what Autobiography of a Yogi did, but in a different way, that explained how we are all one and we're all interconnected. And this concept, he didn't really talk about energy and matter and being interrelated, but obviously we turn to energy when we die, and that energy goes somewhere and then comes back, and and he talked about all these things, and it kind of gave me a really good explanation of what life is all about. And I've just gone on and that was 1968. So I always had that in the back of my mind. And then in 1985, when I met Sharon and Patrick O'Hara, that changed everything for me. And that was like the beginning of everything I've ever learned since then. I already learned from them. So even though I've gone on and read stuff and done different workshops and whatever, everything that I've learned that was supposed to be new was not new to me. I had already learned from Patrick and Sharon.
And how did they know?
Oh my gosh, she was a psychic from when she was born. I mean, she could hear people, what was going on in people's minds. She could, work with the past, the present, whatever. And she met Patrick in Hawaii, and they received messages that they should, now this is kind of funny, I think. Here they are in Hawaii now. Imagine, wouldn't Hawaii be an amazing spiritual place to live?
Yes. Hard yes.
Yeah. So they kept getting messages that they should move to Lavina, Montana. Now, think, Hawaii, Montana, a little teeny weeny town in Montana. But what that did was that moving there, it was more isolated. They could do, and she just was visited by all kinds of phenomenal spiritual teachers, and grew what she knew. And then they were told to go to, I don't know, maybe she wouldn't want me to tell all these stories. But anyway, what happened is she really got serious spiritual awareness. And their job was to teach. And they were one of the few, as they said, there were only a very few master teachers on the planet, maybe 50. And there were almost no couples. Usually it was a man, except for maybe Kuan Yin in the Chinese sage. So their part of their job was to be a couple with her being the lead to transform the world into, number one, understanding the power of the feminine, and long-term goal, the integration of male and female. So
that is so beautiful. And I'm like, okay, so now we're like, you met them in the 70s, then I would assume, right?
No, 85. And that
was
85. Over 30 years ago. And I still work with her.
Right. But we're talking about a time before we're like just logging into the internet to have Zoom, or like, we're talking like how do you be introduced to someone of that, like, power and spiritual awareness? And then how do you, like, back then, did you go to retreats? Like, this is like, I'm like, how did this all start?
Well, everything happens for a reason. And I had been working for Sally Mae, and you may be familiar with them, as somewhat an accounting type of job. And one of the women there had, her roommate had gotten married, and she needed a place to live because the roommate wanted to take over the place that they were living in. And I said, well, you can stay at my house till you get another place. And so she did. And she was there about 4 months. And I mean, I didn't realize that she was like observing me and my kids and making some serious judgments. And she talked about this spiritual retreat she went on every year. And I said, that sounds great. I'd love to go. So I go on this spiritual retreat. I had my own room. I wasn't, I didn't really care about spending time with her. I was not there to be with her. I was there to learn and evolve more. And she told me as we're flying there, she said, now you realize I'm not going to spend any time with you. I know these people. It was like, oh, okay. So the very first night I was there was a couple in front of me in the food line, and we started talking, and they were just so cool. I mean, they just seemed like they had so much light within them. And we talked, and we walked around the campus where we were, and it turned out their room was next door to mine.
Of course.
That's amazing. And in the middle of the week, this woman told me off, the woman I worked with told me off and told me my kids were on drugs and that I was not doing anything about it. And I mean, she just laid me flat. And I went to see this couple. I was devastated. I mean, I knew that my kids were using pot, but I couldn't do much about it. I was trying, but they were teenagers, older teenagers. So, and I didn't think I had the power to stop them, which I didn't actually. And so I went and I was talking to this couple. And so they were just so helpful in getting me to feel better. And I invited them down to come down for Labor Day to just visit. And they came because I lived outside of DC and they lived in Massachusetts. So they came down to visit. My kids loved them. And I said, how did you become who you are? And they said, well, we studied with this couple out of Montana. And they've really changed our lives. And actually, they're coming to the East Coast to do some workshops. I didn't care what they were teaching. I was there. I was going to be there. And the workshops were either in Massachusetts at their place or in Richmond, Virginia. Well, Richmond was closer. So I went to Richmond, Virginia, and it just totally changed my life. It was like practical spirituality. And so much of the spiritual, new agey type world is not particularly practical and how to use it every day and how to be, have a higher level of consciousness and yet live in the world. And they were teaching how to live in the world. And I just, from then on, it was like, it didn't matter where I lived. I was definitely going to invite them to come up and do workshops because that way I could go, So I brought them up to the DC area when I eventually moved. I brought them to Ohio. When I came here to Portland, there was already a group here that were running their workshops, but I actually took that over for a few years. I mean, it was just life-changing. So.
Well, it sounds like it's life-changing, and that's like 34 years of doing the consciousness and like all of that. So when you said you had a health scare right at the can you share a little bit about that? Because I feel like that's where the energetic and the nutritional and that piece started to come into your life as well.
Well, yes, it came into my life more. I had started doing whatever. I only found one book when my son was young. And that was Adele Davis, had like the original book on nutrition. So I had read her book and tried to make some changes, but my husband at the time was, I call him a cocoholic and a chocoholic, ate poorly, didn't think food had anything to do with anything. So it was really, did not want to make any changes. So I did what I could. So now we'd gotten divorced. I'd gotten divorced a second time, and I'm working for Sally Mae, and I had a female problem, and I needed a hysterectomy. So I'm 40. I have the hysterectomy, and I had a thyroid condition too that I'd had since I was 15, and as time had gone by, when they gave me tests, they only came up with now I was not really a hypothyroid, but I was like low normal. So they wouldn't give me anything. Well, I knew that something was going on with that, but they kept telling me no. And they were giving me the wrong tests or not enough of them. So here I was 40, I have this surgery, and I was exhausted, and that's partly thyroid, that it was partly I wasn't recovering well, and I was tired. I was falling asleep at work. I was gaining weight, and it was like, this is not working. And that was when I went to the doctor, and he said, you're over 40. You're going to be tired. You're going to be blah, blah, blah. So that was when I started taking responsibility for my health. And I talked to this woman and started on the products that she recommended. And within 2 weeks, I was like, whoa, I'm not changing anything else. I wasn't really working out. I wasn't, I didn't change my food.
What products were they, just out of curiosity?
Well, I use Shaklee products, and I've used them for over 30 years because they work so well and the research is there and I know they're pure. But I didn't know a lot about that at the time. I just knew I needed to have more energy and to just feel better. I was dragging around. So now here I am, 30 some years later, and I feel, fit and fabulous, So, but I used 3 things. I used something called Herblax, which is 9 herbs, 2 of which work in the colon. The others kind of help purify the blood and do a lot of, just good things. I used a meal replacement, and I used a multivitamin and mineral, and that was it. But later I found out the research behind them made perfect sense, that I would feel better. And in today's world, I basically recommend a lot of the same things I used in the beginning. And they've expanded into something that's, that's a whole nother conversation. But within 2 weeks, to be able to feel that good and not fall asleep at work, which was really, my boss was quite happy about that. And it just changed my life. So that was I had some of the spirituality that was going on a little bit, but not a lot. And I got started in the nutritional part and really loved it, and started studying that and listening to tapes, listening to, reading books, and really learning a lot more about that. And then, so like I said, that was like the base of the triangle. And then as I moved more into the spirituality and personal growth, that became the side. And then the movement, and a couple of years later, it just made the perfect triangle for me.
And so, like, I know that you had Dr. Christiane Northrup as your forward, or at least part, like, in your book somewhere.
She read, yeah, that was a whole interesting thing too. Talk about being a risk taker. I wrote her and asked if she would read my book and possibly give me an endorsement, never knowing whether I would hear back. And I heard back. Her assistant said, you have to send a manuscript before she will do any kind of endorsement. So I got the copy and I sent it on, and she read the book. And if you want, I'll read her quote.
Yeah, read the quote for everybody. This is like, when I saw that, I was like, where does this fall in the story?
So she wrote, rock and roll at any age is full of truth and fun. Getting older does not mean inevitable decline or invisibility. Read this book and start living now. And so I put that on the back of my book.
That's amazing. Like, that says something. Like, I know that there would be no endorsement unless what you were actually writing about, she could actually be a proponent of, right? So that's a celebration.
Oh, it was. That's why it's so prominent in my book. And it really made a lot of difference. People were just amazed that she was the one who gave me an endorsement.
Well, and so did you ever remarry? Like, is that something, or are you with somebody?
Well, remember I told you I started to dance?
Yes.
Well, after I'd started dancing, one evening about 8 months later, I'm at the main place that I used to dance, and I saw this guy that was a phenomenal dancer. And I really wanted to dance with him because I had a dance background, and I was one of the better dancers in the area. And so I was about to go up and ask him if he wanted to dance, because that was something you could do. And right before I went up, he came over to me and he goes like this. And I was like, okay, I'll come out and dance with you. And we were like the perfect partners. It just size-wise and everything. And so we started dancing together, and he was a teacher. He had come from California to DC for a job. And he wasn't teaching in the DC area, but he taught in California. So we started teaching dance, and we started teaching swing and two-step and stuff. It was so much fun. And eventually we became a couple, and eventually we got married. And when we got married, he took a job. God, I have so many amazing stories. When I got the job at Sallie Mae, and I was talking to my supervisor, and she asked me, things that had happened, whatever. And she said, oh my God, you really have been through, it's amazing what you've been through. And so now here I get married, and we moved to Ohio, which is a whole nother world. Really just a whole different culture. And he had taken a job up there. I'd sold my place, he sold his place, we moved there. And the job fell through in 3 months. So it was, I mean, he was just wiped out totally. And I'm a believer that for every emotional action, there's a physical reaction. And he ended up with symptoms of Parkinson's within a couple of years. And there's some studies that show that within 2 years of a traumatic experience, many people will end up with some kind of degenerative problem. It can be cancer, it can be Parkinson's. In fact, I even said that in a nutrition talk that I did, and 2 women who were like in their 80s, they both went, oh! And both of them had gotten cancer within 2 years of when their husband died. Mm. So, I mean, it's really very powerful. I mean, it could be as simple as blushing, you know, when you're embarrassed, but it also can be as major as cancer or Parkinson's. So anyway, so he was actually diagnosed several years later, but he had the symptoms, and I didn't even know what the symptoms were for some of them. I mean, I knew tremors were one, but he had some different symptoms. And I mean, his whole life changed from there. And I ended up becoming the breadwinner. And here was my fledgling Shackley business. And so I built it up in Ohio. And eventually he got a couple of other jobs, but they just never really worked. He was in human resources. And he just ended up helping me. And then we moved in 2000. This was during the 90s. And we moved in 2000 to Oregon. He never really liked Ohio, and I couldn't blame him because it was not kind to him. And my son and daughter-in-law live here in Portland, and he has a son who lives in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I knew a lot of people through Sharon and Patrick O'Hara. I knew a lot of people that lived in Fort Collins, so we were choosing between the two. And Portland just felt right. So we moved to Portland in 2000, and one of my nutrition teachers was here, so which was really amazing. And he put together the program for John, and it really helped tremendously to keep him as healthy as possible, as long as possible. And he's still alive, but he's in a home now. And even though we ended up getting divorced a few years ago, just because that helped him to be able to go on Medicaid, and it helped me to really be able to go on and live my life. I still am his power of attorney. I still visit him. I still, I take him out and do stuff. But it was 12 years of caregiving.
Wow.
That even though he didn't need a huge amount, I have always had a low back problem, so it really made it very hard for me. So that was, so my journey has been, if I look at my journey, I could say, boy, this has been a really bad, I've had a lot of terrible things happen. But I don't know, somehow it made me stronger, and it made me learn from every experience. And I have always looked at, okay, something bad happens. What can I learn from this? What do I need to do? I need to what's the solution? I've always been solution oriented, and that's how I've lived my life.
I love that. And so what is it, just again, you champion, because not a lot of people at that time, women were not becoming the breadwinners at the time that you were the woman breadwinner. Like another champion thing that you were doing, just putting it out there, Joan.
I know. And the fact that I'm in business for myself, the more I look at corporate and I see how people are captured by the corporate supposedly security blanket, which no longer exists. But people are so afraid of going out and doing their own thing. And Shackley is a network marketing company, and they're good ones and they're bad ones. And Shackley happens to be one of the oldest and really excellent one. I learned that by being in business for myself, I also didn't have to spend a lot to have a storefront. I could build it through relationships, and that's really what I've done.
And so that kind of launched you into an entrepreneur in a way. And now that led you into, because you would have probably done workshops through them. And then
I've
that,
done
huh?
I've done workshops, Shackley workshops too.
Yeah, yeah. And then you launched into your own stuff. And so how long have you been doing your own, like Joan Lubar, the actual brand?
Oh boy, I think there was always that part of me that was very independent, because even though I was working through the Shackley model, my interest lay in nutrition, and so, and teaching people how to live a healthier life by changing into something safer and healthier, which I used as a vehicle. I used Shackley, but um, I probably never followed the rules of what anybody taught on how to do anything. So when people started asking, gosh, probably, yeah, maybe the last 10 years, and they kept saying, no, you can't be that old, and how did you do it, and blah, blah, blah. So it was like, I need to write this. And I'd been writing snippets over the years, and I was working with a coach who is just amazing. And she finally said to me, look, I've known you for 2 years. And I mean, when I first met her, I was still in the throes of working with John and trying to help him. And I was in that caregiver mode. So it was hard for me to really be totally business oriented. And so she gave me a lot of slack. But then she said, after everything was taken care of for John, she said, you know, you've been talking for 2 years about writing this book. Let's get it done. And I had pieces for every single chapter. And I worked with an editor who was just an amazing woman. I love her dearly. And she helped me organize it. And Kathleen, my coach, um, kicked me in the butt every week. And she said, okay, what have you done? Let's do an interview to help you with the next chapter. And so that I didn't have to just be writing everything, and I could go back over the interview, make sure I covered all the pieces. And that took about a year. And in January of 2017, I published it, and I'm sort of relaunching it now. I mean, I worked with, about the book for most of 2017. And then kind of in the last year, I think I went back to doing more speaking and more Shackley. And now I'm relaunching the book again.
Well, that's really exciting. So where can people go to get the book and learn more about you and what you do and how they can, be 77? You guys, you need to look at Joan on YouTube. You will not believe your eyes. Where do they find you, Joan?
They find me, well, you can buy the book on Amazon. And it's Joan Lubar, Lubar, and it's rock and roll at any age. You can also go to joanlubar.com, and that's my personal website that you can read about me on that and whatever else you want. There's all kinds of stuff on there. I have several videos on the About Me page that of other interviews. This, I have to say, oh my God, Tamara, this has been more in depth than I've ever done. And it's been more fun. But anyway, so that's how you can reach me.
Well, thank you. I think that the world is about depth. I don't know how to do anything else. It's like you watched that video about introverts and extroverts that I had posted.
Uh-huh.
I was like, upon meeting somebody, I just want to go there. I just want to go right to the depth of who they are, what made them.
I'm the same way. I really am. Although I'm very much an extrovert. You said you were an introvert, and I'm chuckling because I've become more introverted in the last number of years. I mean, I really value my alone time, and now I live alone. So it's been very nice. And yet I can go out and go and play, and I get energized by a party versus, I think, as an introvert, you probably come home and you're like,
I get energized by being alone with my books and my tea and my
Yes,
dog.
yes,
That
yes.
fuels
You
me.
said
Like people are always like, I could live on an island. I could 100%. I would want to tap into people like this, but this ideally, the work that I do gives me the opportunity to work from home and feed my soul from my very favorite space. So
that's
it's
awesome. That's just awesome.
it's just amazing what we can do in this world these days, you know?
Yes, yes. We really are at a place that I think we have all the tools, and now it's the changing of consciousness and the
Ah,
changing
yes, it
of
is.
attitude and trying to be more collaborative and community oriented. And
Yes.
what a difference. The world will change
Yeah.
as and it doesn't take everybody to do that. It takes a small number of people. What you're doing is awesome. Um, really introducing people to a better way of life and living. And um, there's too much good, and we only seem to see the bad, and that's really a shame. There's so much of the news is all the negatives, and then you find the little teeny pieces of a story that you go, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. This is what this person is doing is fabulous, and we don't hear enough about that.
Agreed. Agreed. But I'm going to ask the question if you've listened to the podcast, and I'm just super curious now, Joan, having gotten to know you, and you can only pick one, but what book would you say had the most transformational experience for you?
You know what, the first thing that just flashed into my mind
What?
was Autobiography of a Yogi.
I was hoping you were going to say that because I really want to look that up and find out
Well,
more.
I found it fascinating. I just found it so fascinating. Not as easy a read as you might find in some other books. But and I have to share something else with you. This is because I noticed that you like personal growth, but you also love fantasy. And my granddaughter introduced me to a fantasy series that I just love. It's have you ever heard of Keeper of the Lost Cities?
Maybe not an author.
Sharon Messenger.
No, but will you please send me this information?
I would love to. I mean, I've always loved fantasy, fairy tales, all that sort of stuff. And when I saw that that was one of your favorites, I thought, yes, I have to tell you about that.
I'm so grateful you did. I just bought 3 fantasy books 2 days ago just because I have to have 6 or 7. I'm not even kidding. I need 6 or 7 on my shelf because if anything were to happen and I couldn't leave, I need to have stores of fantasy novels for me to cocoon myself with. Candles and books are things I cannot live without.
Oh,
So
that's awesome.
I'm so excited to read that. And Joan, it has been such a joy, true joy, to be able to share you and learn about you and experience you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. I'm just totally enjoying you. And I'm looking forward to learning more about you and, keeping in touch. This was just awesome.
I agree. I agree. Thank you, everybody who listened. Please let us know what you took away from today's episode. We always love to hear, and we will talk to you so soon.